Just very quickly from me, just to welcome you to the Digital Humanities Lab, which is the sort of physical embodiment of the Sussex Humanities Lab, which is an interdisciplinary cross-university research programme. Paul Lashmar, who's really organised the whole of today and is going to be chairing today's session, to introduce our speakers and take us away. Thank you very much and welcome.
Good afternoon. I'll just start with a little introduction to Duncan, and I'll move round to Bill, gentle sweep. So Duncan is, for those of you who don't know, I suspect you're in this room, you probably do know, but I'll give it a go anyway. He probably started his intelligence career in 1976 by getting arrested under the Official Secrets Act for effectively revealing the existence of GCHQ. You have to bear in mind that it was only a couple of years earlier that the existence of the wartime Bletchley Park had been revealed. So at the time it was a big issue. It also resulted, I think it was 2 years you had legal proceedings for, wasn't it, Duncan?
Yes.
So I first encountered Duncan around that time, although I didn't know him well. I got to know him better over the years, and to watch him get himself into a fine old pickle over the Zircon satellite affair, where he was working for the BBC Scotland, and he discovered the existence of a new British-orientated spy satellite called Zircon, and proposed to put it out in a BBC programme. This did not impress the authorities, who then raided BBC Scotland, and so it's been very much with Duncan. I'd like to think that Duncan is probably the premier intelligence journalist in the country, and we had the reason that we started this is the genesis of this, it might be worth explaining, is that I started at Sussex at the beginning of October, and Duncan lives in Brighton. So I've been meeting with him on occasion, and these events have turned into a bit of what the Americans call a 101. Essentially, I've been reporting on intelligence since the early 70s, mid-70s, and I find the current situation hugely complex, and I can't spend all my time doing it, and it's now getting to the point that the level of basic knowledge you need is very high. This is something of a problem. Duncan, fortunately, has been giving me 101s and telling me what he's been giving me reading lists. So I feel I'm about in the O-level state, as it used to be, or GCSE level, compared to Duncan's somewhat more professorial position in all of this. So that's how it started. And in those conversations, Duncan pointed out to me that he was having trouble getting any of his articles into the mainstream media at the moment, because there's a real sort of genuine lack of curiosity about what the meaning of Snowden. They like the Snowden stuff initially, but then it sort of the interest has dropped off. So I said, well, the thing is that there is a natural audience with academics, because I know a lot of academics are actually profoundly concerned by what they have seen in the Snowden documents and the implications, and are thinking about it in one way or another. So it seemed the natural thing to do would be to bring Duncan in to talk about, as the person who has probably read more of the Snowden documents than anybody else I know, and seen some that other people probably haven't, that his analysis would be invaluable to people who were thinking in this area. And the second part of the notion was that he could perhaps pose some research areas for discussion that we could see where it went from there. However, the best laid plans of mice and men took a slightly unusual sway with the appearance of Bill Binney. It's Bill, it transpired, who is in constant discussion with Duncan, was coming into England, and very kindly agreed to come down to Sussex. Duncan's brought him down from Gatwick, I'm taking him back up there later. Now, Bill, for those of you who don't know, is a 34-year veteran of the National Security Agency. This is a man who has been inside, is a technical expert, and understands the way the digital revolution with intelligence has occurred at a level that few of us can ever begin to understand. After 9/11, he was deeply and profoundly, correct me if I say anything wrong, I'm sure you will, profoundly concerned about the way that the agency was reacting, and moving towards mass surveillance. And he felt, he knew that various methods were being used, particularly to look at to track American citizens that he felt were unconstitutional. So he, in the first instance, resigned and subsequently became a whistleblower. He then moved on to become, in fact, you've been very activist. You've become an activist, in effect, and is engaged with lots of people, including people like Thomas Drake and other people in the States who have reacted to the mass surveillance culture and all it raises. So Bill is doing some extraordinary things, but one of his key areas, and he recently gave evidence to the committee that's reviewed the Investigatory Powers Bill about a month ago, wasn't it?
Yes.
5 weeks ago. Yeah. Bill gave evidence because one of his fundamental positions is, and the word, the operational name thin thread keeps coming up here, is that he does not believe that bulk collection is effective and points to how frequently it has failed. He believes there are other mechanisms that are much more targetable, much more, and lie within the American Constitution and are much more respectful of the citizens' rights. So the way we were planning to have Bill here, I'm extremely grateful. The way we were going to run this, really, I think, is I'm going to be a light touch regulator in the corner as chair. And this is mainly a discussion between Duncan and Bill. And occasionally I might put my hand on the till just to move back in the direction. We're going to then have a discussion for some time, and then we'll go to questions and answers. And then, seeing how it feels at the end, Duncan may then, having heard what people are asking him, make some suggestions as to where this might go in the future. I'd like to welcome Duncan and Bill today. So,
Thank you.
Duncan, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to slow, if it's okay, some slides and just give some narrative at the start, and then go into a conversation with Bill, with whom I'm now familiar, which will try and take you some key points of his career as well as mine. Do come forward and sit down.
I've got to go in a minute.
Sorry, very bad. Very glad to see that. Do come forward if you're... Okay. I also have to go through an interesting ritual, which is new to me in universities, that you have to produce your passport before you're allowed to be heard. So, Herr Doctor, mein Papieren is here. Apparently you have to take them and check them out, so it's available. I'm a journalist. I'm a physics graduate of Oxford University and a less distinguished alumni of this university, where I came in 1974. I worked most of my life as an expert witness, as an investigative journalist, but I've also had a career, because of the rise of electronic surveillance, as a recognised forensic expert witness on computers and telecommunications data when it comes into the British or Scottish criminal or civil courts. And I've pursued that career in parallel for the last 15 years with doing journalism. We'll have a very compressed session. I apologise for going very fast on data if I have to do. And I have noted some potential areas of research at Paul's request to throw out at the end. But we have got a bit of time available. It's been said many times before, but my goodness, we do live in remarkable times. On this day, at this hour, I think history will show that the fate of the Investigatory Powers Bill has been resolved. It hasn't gone to votes yet in Parliament, but because I'm on the inside of the discussion processes between the different groups of MPs, and I'm advising some of them, I know that at this moment, those most concerned to be critical of the bill from all the parties are coming together from the two houses, and they're going to take a view on what they may all do when the bill comes to its second reading on Tuesday. If there is a decision not to oppose, then despite all the discussion, despite all the good faith engagement, the indications are that the most extraordinary changes in the relationship between society and citizen will be steamrolled through. You may hear fine words about lip service paid to privacy concerns and legal concerns, but they're nonsensical. What is bizarre about the time since Snowden, and I'll try and show you this, is that it's opened up an unprecedented, unique dialogue between the people who are informed but critical of mass surveillance or suspicionless surveillance, possibly a better term, and those who are on the inside. But that dialogue is over-trumped by political stupidity and bestiality, by journalists who scream for magical solutions to difficult problems, and the whole willingness of different components of civil society may simply be swept up in the government's rush to push this, to push that. You can tell that they're massively disrupted on Europe at this moment. I may be wrong, but although Tuesday will appear to be the moment in history, I think this afternoon may well be it. Be massively engaged. The Investigatory Powers Bill that is before Parliament does not just reform such recognised things as telephone tapping, lawful interception, and things like that, but essentially lays out and sets a legal framework for things which are quite extraordinary and were no part of anyone's discussion, or even, quite frankly, many of our informed people's actual knowledge. We're talking here about what they call bulk interception of communications, bulk acquisition of massive databases. By the way, you must never say databases to anyone in the government anymore. The word is taboo after various punishing debates. You must call it data sets or something of the kind. The bulk hacking, massive, systematic, automated hacking of people's computers, and the use of hacking as a method, which has huge evidential problems, in that if you go into something that's going to be evidence in a legal proceedings, and yet you secretly change it, how can anyone know what has been changed? These are incredibly fundamental things. They may be worth doing, they may be effective on occasions, but they raise such huge problems. To be confronted with a literal steamroller is just extraordinary and unreasonable. When I say steamroller, I mean that the bill is being rushed through. In the first stage, to which Bill contributed, was utterly compressed. The second stage started on Monday, and we were literally all hit with 1,200 new pages of paper. I have been struggling to tell struggling parliamentarians what possibly 12% of that contains. That's probably as much as I've been able to intelligently touch and go through. And yet, MPs will critically be required to form their views right now. Their parties will form their views over this week, and they'll vote on Tuesday, and although it will go through processes, the expectation in the face of an overwhelming majority is not much change. So that's the context in which there are real issues for society and a huge number of things to engage with. My own time here, if I can go back, I first encountered someone called Brian Easley, who you might not remember, but he was studying history and social studies of science, and that influenced me a lot. He also taught me about methods, which I then used in terms of research, and about paradigm change in the sciences. And I rest on that because we are in a period of paradigm change. The way in which the different components of civil society engage, the openness of those who run the intelligence services has undergone a remarkable transformation. So we'll try and very quickly trace that. And part of that transformation has been partnerships like this. Bill, who served with distinction in the United States government and National Security Agency at a very high level, sitting here and having these kind of discussions. This has been repeated in things like this in many parliaments and many fora. The ABC case, which I was involved in, this is, so I'll go into a little bit of slides if that's okay, and I'll get this, 10 minutes or so. Try and keep it at 10, and then we'll get into the discussions. That would work for you? Okay. James Woolsey, when this first came up, put it out there. He said, "We steal secrets, espionage, communications, and on satellite." Now, part of that actually happens right here in Brighton. You may wonder what Brighton Pier is doing here, but actually in the sea, in the foreground, under the beach right there, is the submarine optical fibre cable UK France number 5. That, according to the Snowden papers, is one of the large optical fibre cables to Europe that is intercepted. It's probably intercepted in a big building that you can see as you drive up London Road at Preston Park, and from there piped an optical fibre all the way to the other side of the country to the GCHQ processing station on the sea cliffs of Devon and at Bute, so it's called. And the agencies we're talking about here, you all know about the donor, GCHQ, and this was where Bill used to work at Fort Meade in Washington, the National Security Agency. Because of the Snowden revelations, people are quite familiar with the allegiance between these two agencies and 3 others from the English-speaking countries known as Five Eyes, put down here as FVEY. But that's only part of the situation that people and governments are looking at all over the world. Besides the second parties, the Five Eyes, there are over 30 countries in previously secret intelligence sharing agreements, which other papers from Snowden acknowledge are not known to their parliaments or to others outside a select circle of ministers. Some of the countries are ones which we would be less comfortable being associated with. Saudi Arabia is a particularly outstanding example in terms of how it treats civil unrest and dissident citizens. The United Kingdom agency GCHQ has some of the same, but also some different alliances, again, some with difficult countries in the Middle East or in the former Soviet republics. There is also the question, again brought out by Snowden, of the extent to which the institutions and organizations and the very mechanisms of the digital economy and digital world have been bought into and subverted, undermined by what is called strategic partnerships. This is one of the things that...
Bill, just to move. Oh, I didn't know if I was in the way. I'm interested. Okay. Okay.
This is one of the things that we learned from the Snowden revelations. Again, the extraordinary extent to which the large communications companies in all countries, Russia can be included in this, we can come to Russia later, play along with the surveillance activities and do so in secret, which raises immediate problems about governance, civil society, and the proper role of parliaments and scrutiny. The overall aspect of global surveillance is probably best shown in this Snowden slide, and it really is extraordinary because you are looking at cable taps in the blue, that is literally cutting into optical fibers such as the one that comes up beside Brighton Pier and many hundreds of others around the world. You have, they are taken for processing. FORNSAT stands for foreign satellites, which is where the previous large-scale communications mechanisms went through relay satellites in orbit high above the Earth and came down to ground stations. When you send signals down to the ground, anybody that's in the so-called footprint of the signal can pick it up. So they were a previously important part of this system. Regional means other countries that play along and provide assistance. And then you have computer network exploitation. That's, in common parlance, hacking. The deliberate putting of malware into computers to obtain information and to take control. According to the documents, 50,000 of those. So you can add to this transformatory landscape, utterly different to the time of the Cold War when Bill was engaged, when it was basically about listening to radio signals, and maybe satellites.
Yep.
But this total penetration of the apparatus of international civil communications is perhaps the biggest paradigm shift that Snowden delivered.
Don't forget the billions of SIM cards.
Yes.
Because the SIM cards allow them to access your device.
The smart cards, and on top of that you have other systems of collection. They have submarines which can go down and connect into the cables on some occasions, at least the US does. Rumors that the
Can I
Russians
point
have
something
been.
out? Notice that all the Five Eyes are dark. They're not dark because they have the Fairview program is the one they use here, and the other countries have their own tapping systems. I don't know if you have a slide on the Fairview there, but there's over 100 tap points inside the United States
Yes.
to catch the domestic communications.
And 30 or 40 in, 30 or 40 on the UK border,
Right.
yes.
We don't want to tell them that. Let's
So-
show.
Submarines, you have aircraft also able to do this. They may be mainly military, but for example, quite possibly right now, there will be an aircraft in an orbit over the Isle of Dogs in London doing intelligence collection down in London. Sometimes those aircraft park over Bradford or other cities. We've had no discussion about them in Parliament and very little indeed in the media. So Snowden and that sort of side opened people's eyes and started a discussion which many governments engaged in, the Americans notably. It's been rather silent over here. And the simple scale of this comes out of one of the GCHQs. 50 billion separate events of people communicating. That, I think, goes back to about 2010, probably 100% bigger now. That's the summary of the sort of the 5 agencies, the third parties, 90 commercial partners, major cable accesses, covert cable accesses, where they may be actually done clandestinely in country or under the sea. Surveillance from embassies, that's extremely controversial with the Germans in particular. The interception of civil satellites, and implants is the term for planting stuff in other computers. There is so much here that you can look at. We've got to cross it so quickly, but immediately there is the other question, what the other side have got in terms of implants in our computers. Bill's former agency, NSA, was supposed to keep America safe. This huge network was supposed also to have a defensive aspect. And then you learn that you get this morning, you're one of 21 million security cleared Americans whose data was hacked by the Chinese. You
My
can't-
entire record. It's called an SF-86.
Yeah.
It's the entire history you have to fill out to get a clearance, plus all the updates. Every 5 years you get an update, clearance update. So that lists all the jobs you had, all the offices you were in, so it traces your entire work history.
And from the point of view of a hostile intelligence agency, it's a gold mine.
Yeah.
Snowden's point, or one of Snowden's points, which is not hard to take from this is all about aggressive, attacking, guard-ripping intelligence and neglecting defense. And that paradigm informs a lot of difficulties that the government and others are now in, because there are inescapable divergences about how you have to go, which the government is not prepared to recognize. That's a younger me just after I graduated from Oxford and was inquiring into what was going on down there at the Bude listening station. I wrote this first article, The Eavesdroppers in Time Out, in 1976. I was living in Brighton. The first thing they did when I rang Cheltenham as a genuine bona fide journalist was to intercept my phone. I lived just down off the Lewis Road. In those days, telephones were wired, and I heard mine tinkling at 6 a.m. in the morning. I knew what it meant. They followed me around the security service all the way through this story. I now know because later on people have talked to me. But one of the things they had to report back, which caused a great deal of fury, was that they didn't break any laws. I did all my research from open sources, and the rest came from United States citizens who were not covered by British official secrecy. But my card was marked, and in 1978, that's a hairier me, I and the guy who used to work in the signals intelligence business in Cyprus, John Berry, and another journalist, he had come forward because of some of the government actions. We were arrested and we were accused under a no longer used section of the Official Secrets Act. Everything about GCHQ was secret at that time. It wasn't ever talked about, it was never mentioned. When they got hold of a transcript of us talking it, they stamped it secret and then wrote top in front of it.
Except by the Russians.
Yeah, the Russians knew everything. They had 4 or 5 divisions by that stage. That wasn't the important thing. That was the indictment at one stage. At one stage, they had me facing 30 years imprisonment for simply conducting an interview and publishing these articles. The world, as you will see, has changed a huge bit. If you want to read up about it, Richard Aldrich's book you can get in the library, is good. That's the map we did from open sources, and It caused a great deal of aggravation and annoyance, but the true provenance of that was that as a schoolboy, I'd spotted these things as a radio amateur and gone to my local public library and found them all by looking up the phone books. They don't usually believe these things. And now we fast forward to May 2015, just under a year ago. In the wake of Snowden, an organisation called the Ditchley Foundation, which is largely organised in conjunction with the British Foreign Office and reflects various British, American, Atlantic ideas, held a conference on intelligence, security and privacy, and invited a large selection of intelligence or former intelligence chiefs from the Western countries. And they asked me to open it in conjunction with this chap here, who's Robert Hannigan. Robert had just then been appointed as the new director of GCHQ. So that is the journey I've been on since my days as a student here myself. That is the journey our country has been on also, from that Cold War barriers to a start of discourse. And as you might gather from this, there is actually an easier rapport in talking understanding than the hysterical language of politicians driven by the media. Not all politicians are stupid. Some of the bright ones and some of the caring and understanding ones are getting together as we speak, but the outcomes may not be very useful for civil society. Subsequently went on to identify many other things in this area. Years before I met Bill, I met a whistleblower in Washington in the wake of this, who was, could not say his name at the time, but he's long since passed on. He was a member of the NSA Scientific Advisory Board, and we had suspicions about this location, large NSA-run station, probably one of the biggest field station in the agency, isn't it?
I think it is now.
Yeah, and went looking, and in a rather interesting journal around Washington, Mr. Oliver Selfridge, who was a founder of artificial intelligence, well, an epochal figure, rather like Alan Turing, said, go look for the cables, they're connected. And that was what led us to understand that even at this time, in these early days, there was a massive collection of information from civilian communications at the height of the Cold War. That's the map. This was actually revealed in the Watergate inquiries in the United States, which led to the first legislation to bring in what NSA was doing. It was discovered that GCHQ had been acquiring international lease carriers, their name at the time, for civilian communications, targeted on US citizens. GCHQ had been helping. The landscape really, we'll hear from Bill, has the landscape changed? In 1988, I was able to do a story on ECHELON with the help of another concerned person who'd served, like in the National Security Agency. And this was an epochal story because it identified the first automated processing of mass surveillance. It wasn't until the Snowden papers, until last summer, that actually I discovered that I got the story completely right. It was inevitably, for the time, thin. But, again, as Paul said, the media don't get it. Politicians don't get it, don't want to know, can't quite believe. None of us could quite believe what Snowden revealed. And as a result, this story went unnoticed for some time. And yet what the papers tell us from Snowden, that we go back to the years of the Cold War, Cuba, the Berlin Wall, Kennedy, and real existential threats. The US NSA was simultaneously and with equal priority designing satellite interception systems, one going for the Russians, I don't think we have any problem with that, they were a strategic enemy. The other was targeted on the new Western satellites about to be built, Intelsat. They were built by American companies. The Soviet bloc and the Chinese Communist bloc could not use them. They were not allowed access to the technology. With one hand, it's NSA spied, and we'll hear in a minute if any of this is wrong, spied on the strategic enemies, and the other on the civil community and the international Western community. And the British location for that, which kicked it off, was viewed as before. It's been upgraded, these are the computers. It was identified again and became controversial in the run-up to 2000 when I was asked to write a report to the European Parliament. And in that I set out, but without the kind of sources that Edward Snowden was there to provide, the scale of mass communications interception. It's pretty well right. The European Parliament went and commissioned a second report to check if we got it right. And the Parliament in due course put forward 30 or 40 recommendations to improve international controls on privacy. And the resolutions, I'm happy to say, were all passed on a singular day, the 5th of September 2001. And 6 days later, the world changed. Meanwhile, in Washington, Bill, can you see the slide?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, when he was chair, I kept saying we could not keep up with the rate at which we were falling behind.
So
think about that for a minute.
Sorry,
I thought it was funny.
falling behind who?
On the digital age.
Oh.
Yeah, for this report.
So these are the classified documents, and they from the NSA. I suspect your name is probably buried under some of the redactions.
Probably erased now.
It's down the memory hole. So they take us to show the epoch at which we should sort of start talking a bit about where we went next. So in this run-up, Bill, as he will tell us, was working on these problems, while I, for the European Parliament, was working on bringing the issues to public attention. It all came to a head and the world changed again because of the attacks on Washington and New York. And they take us rolling on to the events that made Bill leave the National Security Agency, the way the American and other publics have come to awareness of these issues, and the extraordinary series of changes and shifts and many reports which I'll mention to you if we get the chance later, over the last 2 years. Bill, while I was kicking around in the sands and looking at satellite domes, you had a very responsible post. You had to look at warning indicators for the National Security Agency to help protect America in the West. Tell us about it.
Well, I mean, the GCHQ, the Brits over here, used to call me the bottom line. I thought that was a great title. I liked that, the bottom line. You know, it's kind of a cute way of putting what it was. It meant that I had a better understanding of all the ciphers, codes, and systems that Russians were using for nuclear control, as well as military control. And so they always looked at me as the bottom line. You know, if I thought something was suspicious or of extreme concern, then everybody started looking at it. And the reason I did it was because this gets into some of the analytic techniques that aren't being done today by anybody that I can see. For analysis, there's really, it starts out with traffic analysis. You think about analyzing who communicates with who and how often and duration and things like that. And you try to identify who these people are and keep continuity of them over time. That's very important to pass on to the crypt analysts because they need continuity of a crypt system. But in order to do that, in order to set up the settings for cipher on any device, as well as be able to communicate and understand who you are with some degree of validity and authenticity, you know, in your communications, that you have to have data systems that people use and they know how they operate and what those systems are and they're secret. And so you use these secret components. It's like a secret IP address or a secret phone number that can change daily or several times a day. And you alone, supposedly, know what that continuity of that changing component is. Well, for some of us, that was a lot of fun breaking those things, but the point was, once you did that, it lined up and organized everything in an analytic way that told you exactly who was involved in all this activity. And on the other side, what it did was it helped you line up all the crypt starts okay, and get the device line to all the continuity of all the devices. But in the middle, you see, is a field that's not even touched. I call that crypto TA. And what that means is simply you have to look at the data systems, and it's really more about data systems, and what you can do by analyzing data systems and figuring out what's behind everything they're doing. This is where you can actually look into this secret folders in the files that they have. Because once you start solving these systems, you begin to see how they structure what they're doing and how they organize it.
So Bill, this was an insight that you worked on for what was then a strategic enemy.
Yes.
But you then went on, or you were asked, I think, to move from that Soviet surveillance task to something called the SIGINT Advanced,
SARC. Actually, Dr. John Taggart and I created the SARC, SIGINT Automation Research Center.
You have to tell people who Dr. Taggart was.
He was the chief of the research, R06 was staff chief of the research organization at NSA. So we formed that because basically NSA was failing to do anything meaningful in terms of developing new systems to be able to deal with things that were happening. So we formed this because at the core of this was the entire business is founded on analysis. While they focus on, and Duncan gave the layout of what they're doing worldwide in terms of collecting information, they're really doing great at collecting information. The problem is they don't understand it. Right? So that takes analysis, and if the analysts fail, there's no warning of any attack at all. That's why people are dying first now, and then they go after them afterward, and they say, oh yeah, we knew who they were. Well, if you knew that, why didn't you focus on them? You know, that's the point about bulk. This is what bulk acquisition does to you. It buries your analyst in tens of billions of items every day.
When you say that, Bill, are you saying that from experience?
Yes, that's why we did thin thread back in the 1990s. Because even back then, because another job I took on after in 1997 was the technical director of the World Geopolitical and Military Analysis and Reporting Shop, which meant...
Let's just hold that. The technical director of the World Geopolitical Analysis and Reporting. You weren't a low-level contractor technician like Edward Snowden. I don't mean to put him down in that way.
No, I was like the, if you had, I was like a 1.5 star general.
Does that make you a general?
Yeah.
You were a general?
Yeah.
Right.
I was the guy.
And you had been in the military, but...
Oh yes, I had, yeah.
But you would be treated like a general?
Oh yes, yeah. It was embarrassing at times, because sometimes you go, like I go to Wiesbaden, they give me 1/4 of the 6th floor of the hotel. And I say, what am I doing here with all this space? And since we $69 a night for that, it was embarrassing.
And since we've mentioned Wiesbaden, why would you be in Wiesbaden? Just for the
that was the technical center for third parties. Actually, it also supported technically the European theater. So
everything from all these agencies, the other countries, the third countries, that feeds through Wiesbaden into the world system.
So, but you know, that was just one of the embarrassing points of it. You know, I was a solver of problems. Just give me a little cubicle. I like to solve problems. You know, so but one of the biggest problems I saw, of course, was the digital age. You know, back in the 1990s, the mid-90s, it was exploding, and so our analysts were there. They were floundering. They couldn't. I mean, even most we could do at the time was copy a T1 or a 2 megabit line.
Pausing there. A T1 is a description of something that carries digital communications to the internet. Right. How big is that?
It's minuscule.
And how would it be compared to what are the big carriers?
Well, just take the basic optical fiber is a 155 megabit line. So this is like a 2 megabit line. So
80 times smaller.
Yeah, and most of them are packaged now into 10 gigabit lines, like 64 fibers are packaged in one line. You've seen some of the cables that with all these optical fibers coming out with a 64 there, it's a 10 gigabit line. Now they're going, I think, to 40 gigabits as a standard.
So these are huge quantities of information, and what you're saying is that in those days, the agency, and presumably Britain was a little bit trailing as well, were struggling just to cope. So
Yes.
you had to do SIGINT automation to help them get into the internet.
Exactly, yeah. The point was, how could we solve this problem in such a way that actually would help the analysts, so we can understand what we're collecting? So the
Does
question...
that lead to thin thread?
Yes.
Tell us about it.
There were two parts to it, really. Ed Loomis was my partner from RO6. He took Dr. John Teggart's place. And he was working on the front end, which was the sessionizer. See, there's two communication systems we're basically looking at. One's a public switch telephone network system that includes all the satellite phones, the mobile phones, and landline phones. But that's a straightforward problem. There's no issue with that one, simply because we have all the cooperation of every company in the world. And so you know, if we want a number, you have it, and you know, it's not a question. So the other system is the internet. Now the difference is the internet, when you send an email, it breaks it up into packets and sends the packets all around, you know. Mostly they stay close to the same fibers, but they can go down different fibers on the 10 gigabit line. So the point is, it busts it up and then it sends it to an ISP that reconstructs it and then sends it to you when you ask for
Internet
it.
service provider.
Right. So we had to build a sessionizer. First of all, the front-end acquisition data required a sessionizer for the internet. So we had to try to reconstruct a sessionizer that could go at fiber optic rates.
Did you succeed?
Yes, and we did that by 1998.
And how did NSA treat your advance?
Like the plague. I mean, because they weren't prepared to take it. In fact, I thought this was great. We had some of our research sites that we were working with, so they let us play with it. So we would put the system out there and let it run. And so we gave it to our site over here at Bad Aibling, which was a research site.
In Germany?
And we said, why don't you try out this sessionizer, see what you think of it, give us some feedback, we'll see if there's something we need to do to improve it or whatever. And the fellow we knew out there personally said, this is such a great system, it's working so well, I'm going to put it on the whole site. And he did. He put it on there Friday night. Saturday morning, NSA was screaming, calling people in because their entire collection storage system was about to crash. Why? Because this one site was collecting so much data and dumping it all in, because they didn't have our selection process, which would have filtered down 99.9999% throw all that data away. You'd never see it.
So I'm going to flag this up, because now you're coming to a core issue.
Right.
Right. Bill's describing how he's put in place to deal with the issue as it was seen by NSA, also by GCHQ. How do we get all this stuff out from fibers? It's going so fast. The stuff they're trying to tell Parliament they're still struggling with was solved by this guy and his team in the 90s. But at the same time, and this is critical to our discussions and thoughts about mass surveillance or suspicious surveillance, you will renew it in the US Constitution and its protections for civil liberties, the Fourth Amendment. How many people who know the Fourth Amendment here? Oh dear. Oh dear.
Actually, it's first, fourth, fifth, and sixth.
Yes. We've heard of the US Constitution, everybody. It matters. Some of the forebears fought for it, like our forebears fought for the European Convention on Human Rights, which others are trying to trash.
Yeah, I think it was the general writ
So-
that got to us.
We thought
Yeah.
against the American Constitution.
Yeah, right. That's
That is important in the history. We're thinking history, sociology, and technology here. The general writ. What's a general writ?
General warrant.
General warrant, yes.
George III started that stuff.
Bad guy.
Anyway, so
General warrant. Why does it matter here?
well,
why is it comparable?
because it's unconstitutional, right, for us.
Yeah. Because what did the general warrant allow British redcoats
At
to
that
do?
time, it meant they could just have a piece of paper saying, I'm coming in, and I go into any house, take over, and do whatever I want in any house,
And the rise
without any probable cause on anything.
And that's the core issue here. Arising from that, we have the Fourth Amendment to the US Constitution and the same things in Article 8 of the Convention on Human Rights in Europe, United Nations Convention, other conventions including the Charter of the European Union. And it's on this critical thing of general warrants. That's its historical root. And that's, if you're going to look at a research area where technology interacts with history, with everything that's going on, we're at it now. So I'm sorry to be bossy in this talk.
Let me finish my story there about that.
I want to know, I want to frame you on, because this is the critical story. You're going to get all this information, you're going to do the taking, but
there's an important aspect of it. There's an important aspect of it. The point was that you couldn't, the objective I set was to be able, initially, was to be in 1998, was to look at 20 terabytes a minute of data and select out of that what was important. That was the first level of try. I knew we had to go higher, but it was a matter of just seeing, well, let's just do that amount and see how far we can go with that. And the whole point was, you can't take in the data, because if you do, you're buried. It was just too much of it. And the principal way they've been doing it since the telex days. Right? Telex came in the 1930s. Okay? And back in there in World War II, they started this Shamrock program and others to try to pull in data to search. Well, eventually in the 50s, I think it started to be used. They developed this word searching dictionary select approach on this data that they were storing. Well, that simply meant that if you had thousands of analysts putting in words they want to see. So that meant you had the entire dictionary there. That meant it pulled in everything. So that meant when you put it online, like they did in Van Idling, without our selection routine, it pulled in everything because it was pulling in the dictionary select terms. So that's why it got buried. Okay, so our point was dictionary select is a useless way to approach the problem. In fact, it kills your efforts. That's why the people were having difficulty even in the 1990s in NSA, because they were buried because of this dictionary select stuff. You know, it basically didn't reject anything. If something was there, it took it in. So that buried the analysts, and they failed because of it. So the point was, how could we design a method to be able to look into that amount of data, 20 terabytes a minute to start with, and pull out only that which is relevant, and let everything else just go right by. And the way we did it was to use metadata, the metadata that would define the people communicating. Then we built communities of interest, if you will, or basically the social networks of all the metadata that we were looking at. That told us who was who in this massive amount of information passing by, and we used that then to select out that which is relevant. The rest of it just went right by.
So that was at the core of the thin thread.
That was the core of thin thread, yeah, and that made content a manageable problem for analysts to analyze and get understanding. That's the important point.
And you gave this message, helped you go along to the British Parliament for the hearing of the bills.
Yep.
And
then I got personally attacked.
Tell us about it.
No, but I mean, well, this person was just blowing smoke anyway, trying to say, well, I had some other ulterior motive, which I didn't. I didn't have any code, I didn't have any business, I didn't have anything in the background. I just volunteered to tell GCHQ and NSA how to do this if they didn't understand it.
It was distinct that Bill was personally attacked, because now the witness got that treatment. I think it was a marker to some of the members of the committee that they were very scared of his evidence.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you had to say was very focused on the business of stopping terrorists. Because that's what everybody is concerned about. So how does filtering, as you explained it to Parliament, change the way that you would do that in your view?
Well, I mean, the bulk acquisition is the problem, and that's why that was what I was arguing against, because that's the way they're operating now. NSA, GCHQ, the only one that was different for a period of time, I don't know if they're different now, is the D&D. They used to use our old method because we gave it to them.
D&D is the West German Intelligence Agency.
Right. Yeah. So also the Canadians were using our method, and the Australians and New Zealanders were using it.
So there came about this...
Not the British. Not the UK.
So there came about, just as we were in the run-up to all these events, I was doing my report in Europe. Mr. Bin Laden and his plotters were at work in the United States, planning what they did, and you were working away for NSA on how to get into the internet. But NSA, you've told us, turned its back, and the GCHQ didn't want to know in these more advanced messages. Where were you in 9/11?
Well, I took my father-in-law to the eye doctor, so I was watching TV in the reception area where I was waiting for him to come out from being examined, and that's when I saw the first plane hit the tower. And I knew immediately it was a terrorist attack. I mean, here's a bright sunshiny day, and here's this big-ass plane hitting the tower that's visible, for miles. I mean, how could you miss this? How could you not miss it if you're not a terrorist? Hitting it means you're a terrorist. I mean, it's obvious from the beginning.
So what happened next?
Well, then I tried to go back to get back into NSA, try to, look and see what we could just find out some kind of information about it. And they wouldn't let me back in because Hayden had sent everybody home. That was not non-essential. I mean, he sent all non-essential personnel home. That means about 90% of the place left.
How did it feel?
Non-essential.
How did it feel when you went home as a senior member of NSA to see America attacked?
Well, I mean, I just said we failed. We have just failed. I mean, this is clear evidence of just incompetence, unprofessional, and undisciplined intelligence.
Obviously, after this, you and others wanted to look back at what you had in your intelligence.
Well, we wanted to attack it even before that. In January 2001, we wanted to put thin thread on 18 different sites because as the technical director of that group under me, the Terrorist Analysis Center. So I went down to them one day and I said, give me a list of all the sites that produce intelligent information that you find useful in analyzing your terrorist problems. So they gave me 18 sites, so around the world. So I went up and I said, I'm going to propose we'll put these out there because we had our whole system working. It was we were a remotely fully automated system. That meant everything that was operating was controlled from our SARC location. And we did it remotely. So what it meant was we could download all the software on all the equipment worldwide without moving from the SARC. It was all electronically transferred and updated, and we would manage all of the flow of information back from that automatically without people.
Were you allowed to go ahead with that?
No, because it was only going to cost $9.5 million to do it. That's all. So they decided that was a direct threat to getting money for a $4 billion program called Trailblazer at the time. So, and we knew this because the staffers down in Washington were telling us that all of the companies that wanted to feed on this money were coming in and lobbying Congress against our program internally at NSA.
So your program was stopped by commercial interests, you think?
When
you went into, sorry, to go on, when you went into the data that NSA had already collected, was there anything at all?
Oh yeah, oh sure. Tom Drake.
Failing on 9/11.
After 9/11, after 9/11, first of all, after 9/11, they started spying, bulk acquisition and spying on U.S. citizens first. We were first in the pit. Then everybody else came along. So we're all just U.S. citizens, okay? That's fundamentally what's going on. We're all the same. And it means they're taking everything on everybody. And then when that started, they had to use our software to do it. Everything that Snowden has revealed, all the analytic programs, are the stuff we designed in SARC. Okay, those programs, and even the design of multi-party cooperation, that's the design we did in the SARC.
Can I just have a small comment? As part of my prep, I was listening to Thomas Drake talking last night, and he made the assertion that had thin thread been in place at 9/11, operational, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Would you concur?
Yeah, I've said that for many years now because he got permission to run the thin thread program on the entire NSA database after 9/11. This was in February of 2002. So he took the data we already had and ran it against the entire NSA database. He said it took between 24 and 36 hours to run. I mean, that through the entire history, okay, of everything that NSA had ever collected and stored. And it found all of the preps for it. It found the people involved. It found even an item that gave the date of the attack in a picture form. It was instead of 9/11, it's 11/9. Everybody else does day, month, year. Well, they do the same. Well, it's line 11, a little circle in the line. That's 9. 11/9 was the date, and they referred to it as the action time. So
So
I mean,
in summary, the thin thread system, which had been rejected, which was based on filtering, on a retrospective analysis, you found out after the fact.
and the first thing they did was, well, Tom told me this, I wasn't there at the time because I got out because they were being criminal. He basically said that at that point, they absolutely stepped on that and destroyed all evidence of that being discovered. Because this is the one thing that intelligence agencies can't do. They cannot admit they have a problem. Okay, they can't do it. It's a psychological problem. I call them alcoholics. They can't admit it.
Tom Drake was a very senior member of your team.
Oh, he wasn't my team. He was working for the director of SID.
Of Signals Intelligence Division.
Right, and he was brought in as a special transitional agent to help transform NSA into the.
I'm going to ask you if it's okay, Paul, just two more anecdotes from Bill, and then present some literature.
Can I just those who might be interested on just because it was really interesting hearing Thomas Drake talk on this. It was a podcast. If you go into the US Spy Museum, they have a thing called Spycast, which is an extraordinary collection of podcasts, and there is one quite recent from Thomas Drake. And it's like stereo. I've got sort of stereo because on one hand I've got Thomas Drake, who was had a very similar experience to you, became a whistleblower, and his position also was it was unconstitutional. And many of the things you are saying are the same things.
It's also the Second Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yeah, and then there are a whole bunch of other people who have supported
Yeah.
these positions. So this isn't just you.
No.
There's a lot of other quite serious people from within have had this position. So it's quite worth listening to that.
There is also, on that area, there's a new film with Bill and all the other witnesses who were inside NSA at the time, and the woman who was in the Senate staff. It's called The Good American. The Good American in question is Bill. He preceded Edward Snowden by 10 years and was not noisy about his ethical objections.
That's what they attacked me.
To hear about that. That film is going to be released. Any help anybody who film buffs can do. The producer is seeing Bill in Vienna tomorrow, and it's out. It is a very good film, and does explain some of these points. Bill, one of the just wanted to share, if I can, two anecdotes and then one fundamental point. One of the anecdotes which I found riveting when you first described it to me was the days just after 9/11 inside NSA, inside the huge black building you stormed. And you've told me that there was your office, where you were the general in charge of the SIGINT automation, Signals Intelligence, the business of electronics. And just down the corridor was a group that was looking at a big target.
That was, see, all that equipment that came in went down the hall.
And they jumping ahead.
And they reconstructed. Yeah.
There was a group down there.
Oh yeah, they were working the Russian.
There was a group working on the Russians. They were cleared out of their offices, and what happened next?
Well, all the equipment that came in and was being temporarily stored in our area was taken down there, and they reassembled it down there to do the Stellar Wind program.
Stellar Wind. You can read all about Stellar Wind. It's an extraordinary drama. This we've turned this into a book. It's a Snowden paper, but this and a number of other things. My partner Matt, who's standing here, can help you with. We put them on my website because they are pivotal documents. Stellar Wind is a top secret, ultra classified report that Snowden leaked that describes exactly what happened from the moment Bill saw the equipment arriving in those corridors at Fort Meade, the people who were targeting the Russians being cleared out. And they didn't tell you, did they, what was going on? But you could work it out.
See, they had to use the software that we built because it was the only thing that could handle the massive amounts of data. So they had to use our contractors to put that in, to configure the system and load up the software and get it running, because nobody else knew how to do that. And so when they did that, why the contractors came and said, hey, you know what they're doing down there? So they're taking in all this data. First of all, it came in all this, about 340 million records a day from AT&T on US citizens alone.
Presumably at the time, you had the highest classifications just about that anybody could have to look at secret intelligence.
Oh, I had about 20 compartments above and beyond top secret, yeah.
But not this one.
No.
You
no.
had to work that out as an intelligence.
Well, they didn't
officer.
want me to know, you see. because they knew I was a straight shooter. I would never put up with it.
What was your view and what did you do?
Well, I mean, immediately, it was obvious that this was unlawful. It violated the pen register law, the Electronic Privacy Act, Electronic Security Act, the Intelligence Act 1947, the Intelligence Act 1978, the constitutional amendments, the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments, and all the FCC regulations and laws that were applied to all the telecoms, because they were violating those regulations too.
And it's worse than that. If you read the report that Snowden leaked, not only does it absolutely authenticate every part of Bill's experience, what you would learn is that the secret order to turn his technologies and the room that used to be used for the spying on the Russians in on the American people was a secret, so secret that even the top lawyer, the general counsel of the NSA, was not permitted to read the concoction that had been drafted in the White House to make this appear to be legal. The director of NSA went along with it, but even the guy running the program wasn't allowed to see the directive. That is stellar. And the Ewell Award from the US government came a few years later when there was a knock at your door.
Yeah, but see, first of all, I couldn't sit there and let that happen in my country. Okay, this is my country, not theirs. I'm not going to let them steal my country. So I immediately went to the intelligence committees and said, hey, this is what they're doing out there at NSA. Because the intelligence committees were formed to make sure that NSA, because of the Minaret program, the Shamrock program, and then FBI did COINTELPRO and CIA did Chaos. The three agencies were working together against U.S. citizens back when Nixon had it, and that's why Nixon got impeached. Okay, and so here they are again doing the same damn thing, and except the order of magnitude is much greater than it was back when Nixon could only do, a couple tens of thousands of people at most, whereas here we're doing 270 to 280 million U.S. citizens alone, not counting the other 4 billion people on the planet. So my point was that this was their function to stop this. So I went down there to tell them. And so once I did that, they unfortunately didn't realize that the first 4 people briefed in. This is how you co-opt in a democracy. And somebody's got to make a film about this sometime, because this is what happened. The characters in the center of conspiracy to do it were Hayden, Tenet, Cheney, and Bush. They were the 4th, the middle. And Cheney made the decision with
the vice president at the time.
And it's this entire program inside NSA was called the Cheney blood oath. You remember some of the westerns where the Indians would come up, and you cut your hands and you put your hands together. Now you're blood brothers. That's called the blood oath. Well, that's what we called this program, was a Cheney blood oath, with Dick Cheney directly running it.
But the long and the short of it was that about 2 weeks after you realized what was going on, you left the job.
Yes, well, it was pointless. See, I knew all the people at the top anyways. It was pointless to talk to them. I knew they wouldn't do it without, cover from above. So I knew everybody was in it. So I had to go to the other rails of government who were supposed to cross-check the administration, mainly the Congress and also the judiciary. Actually, we even tried to discuss this with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, whose ultimate job is to defend the Constitution. The President's job is to protect, defend, and preserve the Constitution. And here they were all violating it, all destroying it in secret, with secret rulings and secret opinions, and by very finite numbers of people. The only 4 people in Congress that knew about it were, unfortunately, the chair and ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees.
And what came to happen after that, it was an illegal program. That's essentially been whitewashed out of US history. But if you read the classified history and the supporting documents that have now been declassified and published, it is completely clear. By the middle of the last decade, enough of what had gone on started to leak out into some American newspapers, just hints of this mass surveillance program. It was not, however, and despite Bill and Tom Drake was an ex-Air Force officer. He would fly big aircraft around to collect these signals, and then he was working in London while I was doing my stuff. They were all moved out, they've told their stories now, but it was not until Edward Snowden's papers hit the world through The Guardian in 2013 that the seriousness of this came out. In consequence of Edward Snowden, in the United States, significant changes were made. A law had been brought in because of the press disclosures in the middle of the decade to essentially legitimize the secret cooperation.
Retroactive immunity for the crimes that telecoms committed.
And I'm afraid I remember the day that I saw Barack Obama as prospective candidate had allowed the legislation of retrospective immunity. I just lost faith that that was going to change very much. And it is those kind of powerful actions, decisive. The presidential secret program was therefore reconstituted and legitimated, but it's now been stopped. Once people realized, and once the government realized, that finally that kind of collection stopped, some of it stopped, most of it actually still carries on. The critical thing here is, what are we all about? We have common values and a common purpose and a common intent, yes, to stop the terrorists. Their ability to influence societies and cause change is hugely magnified by one of my main professions, the journalists, and then taken into the minds of politicians who say, oh, well, something must be done, who turn to the spy chiefs who say, we'll do our best,
But we need more money.
we must have more money, more billions, and so on. And they don't stop and listen to people who build. They've been there listening at the cutting edge of stuff and say, you want to be effective. The reason I probably got invited to that conference was I made a surprising new best friend, the former chief of Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, the James Bonds. We were in a private conference like this one evening, and he put out to a Guardian, which included some of the serving people from GCHQ and Cheltenham, what am I supposed to do when there's blood on the streets? I'm responsible for or I was responsible for Britain's Secret Service. Our job is to get that intelligence, put it in the hands of security people and make it stop. They went round the room in those various platitudes and waffles, and I sort of rounded on everybody and said, look, the problem is the rest of society have to give you support in understanding that part of your job means you will fail some of the time. You simply cannot be tasked or required always to succeed. A politician who requires you to do that is a despot. A journalist who requires a politician to ask that of you is an idiot. And that's what we've mostly got. So don't...
Actually, I think Harry Truman had it right. When he characterized U.S. politicians, he said, when I was growing up, I had a choice of two occupations. One to become a piano player in a whorehouse, and the other was a politician. And in the end, there wasn't much difference.
So if I just make a quick couple of points, I mean, just to reinforce it's interesting that the New York Times sat on that story 14 months because they were so concerned that it would backfire on them before they released their publishers in 2006. As a journalist and academic, I have to bring it back to journalism at the time.
Yeah, and the only reason they did that was because Jim Risen was putting it in his book.
Yeah.
And he was going to do that no matter what they did. So he forced their hand.
It's also worth pointing out that Obama's administration has prosecuted more journalists and also sought to prosecute more journalists, but certainly has prosecuted more sources from within intelligence than any other previous administration.
Absolutely.
And this sort of brings me back to the point I feel very strongly about, which is my primary concern, which is accountability, is that, you know, this isn't journalists poking their nose into a situation where they're all doing a great job with no, they're making what it looks like some very serious errors. And what I think passes a lot of people by is the sheer scale of the intelligence industrial complex. It's replaced the military industrial. There are billions of dollars in the States and billions, and this means that these things get driven by financial lobbies, not by national security lobbies. And the fact is, in this country, I would say there is no journalist who is on top of this is working in a major media organisation at the moment. I mean, I'll just give you a quick example. This document I took off of Cryptome, which is a sort of repository for people interested in this area. And this is a Snowden-related document. I think it's about 90 pages long, or 70 pages. I really struggle with understanding of this, but I bet if you brought every national security reporter and put it in, did an exam on it, they'd all fail. So how can they monitor what's going on in the security regime if they don't understand this stuff? I can't, and Duncan, I suspect, largely does, but that's a lone voice. So there is an enormous accountability issue, and one wonders whether the arrangements at the various regulatory bodies, and this is a discussion I've been having with Duncan, they've got the resources or capability to understand what's going on and monitor it and look for where things are going amiss, or whether they're just hanging on the coattails. Anyway, that's my observation from the chair.
The core thing that we're trying to drive towards as an idea and try to bring forward to Parliament informs many discourses it may be. I know part of the purpose of this seminar, and we can repeat this seminar if there is the will conveyed to Alvin and Paul in a more working thing where we can look at documents and subject areas and so on. But the stupidity paradigm that is presented is that security issues and privacy issues are a zero-sum game. You have to trade them all. If there is one lesson that Bill Binney's experience, and it is experience that counts, because people like Paul and me, we may know stuff, but we've never done it. We've never been at the sharp end. Bill had 30 years sitting in the front seat protecting the West in assessing Soviet intentions to attack or not attack with nuclear weapons. Absolutely existential stuff. They will not listen to people like Bill, and that is appalling. Because the lesson of what Bill has called smart collection and filtering is that you may actually be able to save more lives. The overarching collection of everything, and of course at the same time much more sparing of the intrusions and privacy. So these are fundamentally powerful ideas. And what is really galling to me is I just found yesterday, there was a fantastic, very complex thing, even harder than this, not released by Edward Snowden, released by the government, the US government, which intelligently did take on the kind of points Bill were making. It's called Bulk Collection of Signals Intelligence Technical Options by the National Academy of Sciences. I have to say with great shame that the person who stuck this in my face was the former director of GCHQ, not Robert Campbell, but another chap, David O'Mahon, who I now run into quite frequently on the intelligent combat circuit for these matters. And it is addressing them, and the Home Office people and David said to me, oh, it shows that what GCHQ are doing is just fine. No, the hell it does not. It doesn't, and that is intellectually dishonest. But the people who are writing this are being more honest. And just yesterday, Robert Hannigan went over to MIT and he put up this paper, which you can get, Front Doors and Strong Locks, Encryption, Privacy and Intelligence Guarding the Digital Area. And I recommend reading this for anyone who's trying to follow what's going on now with Apple, because this is the British GCHQ director's input to it. And it is intelligent and perceptive and technically informed beyond anything you would ever have seen in this country in the years before Snowden. But what he does, when you read it carefully, and what this does say, is not say there are solutions. Theresa Bloody May, the Home Secretary who's pushing through this bill, wants magic. She wants it to be simultaneously possible for all of our ultra-vital cyber-based security systems, banks, government systems, the military, the rest of it, to be utterly secure, but at the same time you want designed in or left in holes so that we can attack. Now, Hannigan and the committee here, I just want to quote Robert Hannigan's, having been once nearly jailed for 30 years for exposing his institution. I found David O'Mahon quoting me on other occasions. I could quote, The debate is not about back doors or front doors, it's about whether entry into the house is lawful at all. It is about whether you risk letting anyone else in if you accept that the lawful authorities can enter with a warrant. This is a fundamental issue all liberal democracies have to grapple with, about striking the right balance. It is for constitutional and democratic processes, for elected lawmakers, and in some cases the courts to determine the outcome. I can't disagree with a word of it. I agree with every word. Probably you do too. The courts he's referring to, of course, the courts the British government don't like to speak about, the European Court of Justice, the European Court of Human Rights, which in a series of landmark judgments in the last year have basically said that bulk surveillance, bulk collection, without doing the kind of things that Bill did, stands against the Convention, against human rights. And I think, but we can have an argument, we can have a discussion. I think that that is the language of the US Constitution. It is the language born of the American colonialist struggle against the British, just as the Human Rights Convention is the language born of freeing, the experience of freeing Europe in the face of the Nazis. It is casually cast aside by people like the Home Secretary. This is a delightful little piss take that Matt's also responsible for, because she has wanted Parliament to create internet connection records, so that in the same way as who you telephone can be recorded, you can automatically go into the contents of the internet and pull out everybody you've linked to on Facebook or WhatsApp or the messaging application. The internet does not work like that. You cannot ask for magic. The latest stuff which hit us on Monday, hundreds of pages of turgid nonsense, and then one paper I spotted that they haven't even got the slightest idea, because they revealed that in comparing what had gone wrong when they introduced that in Denmark, they talked about methods called sampling, which simply don't work for what the police say they want and security want. So if you want one of these delightful books with Theresa May's special knowledge on the whole of the internet and how they, and here we can see just, do buy one, Matt's got a few. That's the commercial.
Could I say something about the Apple thing? And not too many people are talking about this, but my understanding of this, the FBI wants three things done. One, to stop, not about the encryption, it's about the protection of the passwords. First, they want to eliminate the software that would, if you try 10 times and fail, you fed 10 bad passwords in, it erases everything on the phone. They want to get rid of that. They also want to get rid of the speed at which you put, you can put password tries in. Like you put one in 1 minute, they have to wait a minute, then put another one in, and then wait a minute plus a minute for that. They want that gone so they can quickly test things in brute force fashion. And the third thing is they have in there, there's some software in there that looks for inconsistent character spacing of password entry. That means a human's typing it in, okay? So that's the third thing they want to have done. Now, they want that because that means they could brute force any phone, any iPhone, anywhere. Now you pair that up with all the SIM cards they've taken in those cell phones. They can access those iPhones through the network anywhere through the pass key, they get through it on the key, the entry into that phone, and they can start testing and get the passwords and then download the phone anywhere it is in the world.
So what you're saying, I think, Bill, is that whereas the FBI is suggesting that, oh, it's just the question...
NSA in the background.
Sorry, yes, with NSA in the background, saying it's just the question of this woman who shot up some citizens and we just want to see what she might have done. Yeah, there's a lot of ways in which that is specious.
Well, I mean, they could also get the data from NSA if they wanted to, or they can give the phone to NSA and let them try to crack it, or they can do a, I know they scraped the cloud, the Apple cloud, backing up whatever they had there. So what's the wrong? This is not the issue, right? The issue is to get to any iPhone anywhere in the world anytime they want to.
Tearing down the security defenses.
Or if you want this bulk attack, you can bulk attack every one of them in the world.
The problem is,
All at once.
the core problem which stupid discourse in the media and politics does not face up to, is that whilst what the FBI want is achievable, technically, probably, although that is possibly questionable, if Apple yield, then every other country will make the same demand. Countries where we want to protect people, countries where people are in struggle against totalitarian rulers. There is a universality of security and technology, just as there is a universality of human rights and the jurisprudence to protect it, and they are there for a reason. And that is the problem, because I can endorse what Robert Hannigan said. I think he's right. I think he said it. And he doesn't try to fudge it, although there is a hint of pressure there that he is being asked to deliver magic from GCHQ. And I would like to get the man over the table and find out whether he's just saying that because the ministers are saying it.
Look, can I add something?
Yeah.
Because, there's just so many aspects of this anyway. But I would say, first of all, you can do a lot of it with metadata with no content whatsoever. I mean, all of the 5 warning indicators I had for the warning against the Soviet problem, none of them involve content.
Could I, at this point, take over?
Yes.
Not quite. I'm conscious of the time, and what I thought I might do at just this point really was, and I want to move on to question and answers, but I am aware that sometimes in these late afternoon things people do need to get away. So I wonder at this point, while there is a large audience still present, whether we could thank Duncan and Bill for coming in, and if anybody needs to get away, they can move, and then we'll do question and answers.
I think we're good for, what, half an hour more for those who can stay.
So, so thank you very much.
Feel free to applaud us again after the Q&A.
Depends on your answers.
Right. I can see immediately. Right, okay. A question from this gentleman here.
Fascinating presentation, for which I'm very grateful. But one of the many things that puzzles me is this. Theresa May's bill wants to suck up all this data, but if I understand Bill's narrative correctly, they won't be able to make anything of it.
Well, they wait till people get killed, then focus on the people who did it. And then they've got all this data on them. And they can
But
focus.
it won't provide any protection or security.
No, you can't stop it. People have to die first. That's the point.
Okay.
That's why these are idiots running these intelligence agencies.
I
Sorry.
think Bill and I have tried to make a reasoned case to the committee and put stuff before them, but there are 2 strands to this. And we can be empiricists about this, right? 9/11 was an intelligence failure, and Bill's colleague, Mr. Drake, went back through the data with the competent program, and their hypothesis, which could be tested if the bloody data hadn't now been destroyed, which we're told is the case, was that the selective program would have alerted American time. When the presidential board went through NSA's claims that their vast collection program had stopped 50 attacks, and these were examined, it boiled down to one non-attack. The famous example of San Diego taxi driver who did wire some dollars to a terrorist organization overseas. In Europe, in all the attacks in America,
Which, by the way, would have been targeted by the targeted approach. Didn't require bulk
it
acquisition.
did require bulk, yeah.
Didn't require bulk.
Did not.
GCHQ had this stuff going by 2011, and we were attacked on the streets of London, not once but twice. There was no warning intelligence. Woolwich was a one-off. It was unstoppable. It was unstoppable. And the failure with Woolwich, which is clear from the intelligence security, this is where the trooper was stabbed by 2 mad jihadis in the off-duty soldier. It is perfectly clear from the Intelligence Security Committee report that human intelligence leads were available. And that is the pattern with Charlie Hebdo in Paris, with the battle line attacks, with Copenhagen, with Boston,
Paris.
with Fort Hood. All over Europe and America, every time there was retrospective analysis, there were triggers for human intelligence. Now, human intelligence on the ground, surveillance, physical surveillance, intrusive surveillance.
Look, I have 2 cases I need to point here. One is the Garland, Texas attack. That's when they had this group of people doing a cartoon contest on Muhammad, and the police were there and they protected them. Well, 2 days before that attack occurred, the Garland police got a tip-off that the attack was coming by a member of Anonymous. Now, the member of Anonymous was looking at social networking, and he saw somebody, he or she saw somebody talking about doing some kind of violent attack or something, and they followed them. And then when they said they were going to do what they were going to do, they notified the Garland police. The U.S. spends over $100 billion a year on intelligence agencies, all 16 of them, right? And they said absolutely nothing. What's the difference? They were doing bulk. Anonymous was doing a focused attack. The other point I would also say is that I know how we in the United States were safe from Al-Qaeda. And it wasn't by any of this bulk crap. It wasn't by anything that NSA did. It was all done by CIA. They had a very focused, professional, disciplined attack on Al-Qaeda worldwide, because we knew the entire network. And they took those people out. That's why they all ran into hiding. And from there on, they had no support network worldwide, and they had no way to do any attack internationally. That's why we were safe, not because of this other crap.
Gentleman here.
Thanks very much. Alex Conte from Sussex Law School. Thank you very much for your presentation. I mean, it strikes me as rather frustrating and ironic that you're able to say that a smart filtering system is going to lead to actionable intelligence that will at the same time involve an interference with privacy that is at least capable of being justified as necessary and proportionate. And yet politicians aren't going down that track. And my question is, why do you think that is? Is it because they're being asked to do the impossible and they want to do the impossible? Is it because it's too expensive? Is it because they want to be able to collect bulk data in order to retrospectively prosecute individuals in the face of situations where they haven't been able to date?
That in fact has already happened. And the Solicitor General of the United States testified to the Supreme Court of the United States in the case that you can look up on the web, Clapper, Amnesty International versus Clapper. He testified to the Supreme Court that none of the data collected by NSA was used against any individual in a court of law, and if it was, they were told that that was in fact the case, so that they could have their constitutional right to challenge discovery of information in the court of law. And in fact, none of that has ever happened, and they had, according to Senator Feinstein, testimony on the floor of the Senate, they had used this program to put hundreds of people in jail every year. Now now the Solicitor General has lied to the Supreme Court. I don't understand why the Supreme Court didn't reinstate that case with prejudice against the government for perjuring themselves in court. But see, the problem is, they had the entire FISA court that's issuing general warrants, illegal unconstitutional activity. And you've got all the intelligence committees that are part of it, and all the leadership in the House and Senate who are also part of it now, and have been for a number of years. They're all a part of this. Entire highest levels of all the government departments are in this. And so they all have to protect one another, even all the attorney generals. They all were cleared for this. They all knew this was going on.
I think you put your finger on the core issues. And I think the language that Director Hannigan used, the language of the presidential advisory group that produced this report, really kicks back that fundamental schism to the democratic forum, because they can't offer a technical solution. The issue you put to Bill technically divides, I think, into two. One is the operational efficiency of the filtering method, right? And which you throw away a lot of stuff absent your filters. Now, quite frankly, and it's a discussion we should have other times or another fora, a lot of what Bill proposes still leaves me uncomfortable, uncertain. I come from, obviously, a very pro-civil liberties point of view. But this is what I mean, we can have this discussion. And I think Bill's case has overwhelming evidence for it. It is manifestly efficient, particularly if it's coupled to an identification where intelligence capabilities are efficient. The government gives us all this talk about agility, but the fact is that the security service, which puts the boots on the ground to follow bad people around, is under-resourced because of the glitzy toys of internet surveillance and what they propose to do.
I would also say that all of that, all of the assertions we've been making about the thin thread program and the approach are validated in the DODIG complaint and their report. It's on the web also.
United States Department of Defense Inspector General.
Inspector General report on, the title of it is Trailblazer and Thin Thread Requirements, and it is 05 Intel-Intel-03.
We'll be able to find it.
Issued, I think, the 14th or 15th of December, or that's the date on the issue, but actually that came out January 2005.
The other issue is what I would call the history question. If you don't keep the data from whether it's a filtered target operation or a more mass surveillance operation, then if you later discover something that makes you want to put an inquiry to the data, it isn't there. And there is no magic answer to this. You actually have to go to the principles of human rights and say which is more important, that you create an enabling facility for totalitarianism, to put it as the most extreme example, but it's relevant because the judgment that may hit the United Kingdom most in terms of this law, if it is passed, will be one that has been taken against the Russian SORM system, in the Zakharov case, if you know what I'm talking about. The history question, I've tried this with various people, and maybe Bill can give us his view, but I think you are driven down to, on its face, if you think that is what you need to crack the problem and you don't keep the data, then you do have the problem. But this is to take a telescope vision view of the situation. The totality of intelligence is not stored data records. That's a tiny but very facilitating part of it. It's putting together all the stuff, the human sources, the long-term records, and so on. As it is, the collection that GCHQ does is not total. It can't be total. The Snowden documents indicate that they can jump around between all of the different stuff that comes through the UK, but they make decisions. They would like us to believe that they only jump on Afghanistan or Iran or places of that kind, but when you discover little documents showing that the entire Google transfer between the data center was intercepted, you know that's not true. That clearly is not true. But there are limitations, Intelligence Security Committee spelled out in terms of the number of things that can be attacked at once and analyzed at once. So these limitations exist. The history question faces them because of the resources question, because of technology questions. The history is not complete. There is going to be no complete total collection of everything. So they're already patchy. So where they are trying to deceive the politicians in this, I would suggest, is that they're not acknowledging what else they can do with good intelligence that might be diverted into a less intrusive way. One of the most telling things about this bill is that the powers used to bug people's houses, bug people's cars, follow them around, create tracking devices, were enabled in the 2000 Regulation of Investigative Powers Act. And nobody has complained. Nobody has asked for more powers. Nobody on the civil liberties side or the lawyers, and correct me if I'm wrong, has taken a significant case on abuse or misuse of authorities for directed and intrusive surveillance. But they are the things which, on the evidence of the last 15 years, have kept us protected, as opposed to the large-scale communications collection programs which are to be enhanced and turned into comprehensive collection legitimated through the proposed new powers. If that makes sense.
Orban is next on the...
Well, this follows up Alex's excellent question and asks it from a different perspective, really. In your talks, you identify two very large things. One, which is bulk collection is seen as the answer, and may in fact be the problem because of its opaque and difficult nature. And the other part is the accountability, civil society, social contract, democracy element. Is this something that we should be doing? My question would be, in your discussions with politicians and people in the services, and in relation to the bill going through Parliament this week, next week, which of those issues has most traction with them? Which do they see as the biggest issue or the biggest problem?
Set out the options
Democracy
again.
or
Accountability.
bulk collection not being the answer?
They're not even addressing the problems. In those terms, they are really overwhelmed by the data. And every time there is an issue, it is very hard for them to get a technically informed discourse. And they're driven back to, well, we don't want to be soft in terrorism.
Isn't it also that there's a fear that they do not want a major terrorist incident on their watch? And
Who does?
well, no one does, but you know that's what he's aware of. It's very interesting that the Met's anti-terrorism senior officer Rowley has said today that there is a event, they're expecting some kind of attempt, and it's interesting that it should happen this. You know, he hasn't given a specific. He hasn't said whether it's chatter, which is the usual way these things. He says there is an expectation that ISIS are raising its game, and there's going to be an attack on Western lifestyles in this country. And it's a really interesting piece of timing. Now, it may be that he does know something, and he should know something that we do not know.
He's probably got a human tip.
You reckon?
Yeah.
He's got a source.
Yeah, from the Pakistanis.
He's been in the pub.
Someone's
told me.
Yeah.
I see. Right.
So
Okay. Hang on. Okay. Gentleman there, and then the gentleman there. Whichever way. You know who was first. You go first. Sit next to me.
It was just a question directed primarily towards Bill and the culture of sort of security agencies, because just thinking about your idea of bulk collection, and you've mentioned how useless you think it is, but just my reading, and I think his name's Gus Hunt from the CAA, said some comment about we want to collect everything and keep it forever or something to that effect. Just from some of the sort of ethnographic work in terms of European security and things, it seems to me that there's a strong future orientation, but there is also a belief that the perfect predictive analytics and algorithms are just around the corner, which will actually mean that your whole human process of analysis would be redundant. Or I'm saying that's the belief, that appears to me to be the belief. That there is some sort of
There's a problem with
security
that, because
utopia.
they could use that against any political party they want. If you can write an algorithm to do a decision tree on any terrorist or any other organization, you can do that for your own political parties. So now you have a way of competing, of taking care of your competitors in politics.
That's a slightly more sinister
Dick Cheney, Nixon.
I didn't thought that. I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is, is there the bulk collection in part seems to be almost answering the question that you touched on one point, where you said that in the 1990s or something, you couldn't believe how fast you were falling behind or something.
Yeah.
It's almost like a counterbalance to that. There now seems to be an almost, utopian faith that that these sort of automated processes are going to answer the bulk question. Would that be fair enough?
Yes, but see, they're not doing the right things to make that happen. That's why the White House issued the Big Data Initiative in 2012. Soliciting industry to come up with algorithms to go through massive amounts of big data and find what's important for people to look at, because people can't do it. That's produced nothing so far, and they're still not. Since I've been able to do some of those things, and they haven't done anything since I left. And I've looked at everything that's been said, and nothing is going down the right path. So they're all going to continue to fail, and that's not in the future that I see so far. On any of them.
But do they believe that though?
Oh, I'm sure they did. It's a good money. It's a good source for money.
When you want them together.
Get them together.
Okay, right. just on that final point, is the intelligentizing of politics is another very interesting area that is beginning to occur. The Koch brothers have an intelligence agency operating against their political opponents. Right, perhaps if we could take a couple of questions together, because we're beginning to... So if I can take that gentleman...
Okay, I guess the question is user perspectives on this. So, I mean, Edward Snowden famously told people to encrypt their email. And I'm wondering about those sort of technologies and how effective you actually think they are. Because it seems to me that what you're saying is most of the intelligence is actually in the metadata. So encrypting my email makes a little difference if it's being gathered and...
I haven't looked at a lot of publicly available encryption systems, but the ones I've looked at all had a fixed key per user. That's a structural flaw in an encryption system. I knew Cecil Phillips and some other people who worked on the Venona system, which was supposed to be a one-time pad used by the Russian diplomats back in the 1940s and 50s. And they broke into that because they reused the pads. So if you reuse the crypt system, it gives depth of information about it, and it's a structural flaw in how it operates. So sooner or later, it's going to be broken into, is my view.
Next question.
Hi, thank you. And I have two questions, but I can try and say them very quickly. One is, so your thin thread model of filtering in smart collection, it sounds like you're saying it's like an either-or sum at the moment between the bulk data collection that's happening and this model that you've proposed. And maybe I misunderstood, but could they not use both? The people that are saying that all they want to do is stop a terrorist attack, and I don't agree at all with this bulk collection thing, but why aren't they using both of them, for example? Could they not do that? Or
because they were soliciting billions of dollars for a bulk collection system called Trailblazer, for example. And if they said they had a system that functioned and gave the analysts what they needed to solve the problem of velocity, variety, and volume, then they don't have the justification to get that money.
So they are lying when they say they only want to protect.
They've been lying all along. Yeah,
lives.
they've been saying it's been a lie that you have to trade privacy for security. That's a lie. It always has been.
Okay.
I mean, the scandal is fantastic. I mean, both the GCHQ and the NSA are currently building buildings to store this stuff on the gigantic scale. What's the size of the
2.8 million square feet?
And that's the size of, I mean...
3 times Utah is what they're building. They just broke ground for it last year.
This is in Utah, a building of staggering proportions, which is going to be purely for storage for bulk collection in data. So.
And now they're coming in with little discs, glass discs like that can store 320 terabytes. Imagine 100,000 square foot of racks, 8 foot high, stacked with these little things, storing each 320 terabytes.
That's a lot of data.
That's when I said, by the way, you just hit it right there. I had been saying in the last CIJ symposium that Gavin McFadden had here in London. I would participate in there, and I thought, well, sooner or later they're going to get into quantum storage. This is getting very close to that, okay? And so I said they have to come up with something more than a yottabyte, because a yottabyte is 10 to the 24th characters. That giving quantum storage means every atom can be a bit, so that means you have to go much further along than that. So I was suggesting that we should then go from 10 to the 24th, 10 to the 27th, and 10 to the 30th. It should be a bunch of bytes and then a lot of bytes, with my names for them. Well, they've named them now. One is called Gornobytes, and the other is Brontobytes. And my partner Ed sent me a note. He says, they're inconsistent. They should have, if one was Brontobytes, the other should have been terabytes. Tyrannobytes. Sorry, something like that. But they do now have names for it, so they're preparing for the storage, okay? Which simply means any more data they can capture, they'll have it all stored, which is their objective.
I'd like to try and respond to some of these points, but also fulfill my promise to Paul at the beginning to throw out some broad research ideas. I do that, of course, completely ignorant, say, for the colleague from the law school, as to what disciplines you represent, which are doubtless many. But it it has seemed to me extremely obvious, in particular as I've tried to research things and tutor people, that there are absolutely cutting-edge, pivotal concepts that have to be thought through intellectually and technically, and the most difficult of them are the ones that have to be thought through intellectually, technically, legally, and probably philosophically as well, and at the same time. One of them was mentioned by a colleague there, the sociology of intelligence officers. I think that's absolutely fascinating. Looking back on the last 18 months, I realized that something I suspected was spot on. This was in the first rounds of when we were actually meeting people who were in the job or recently from the job. And I realized that one of the things that was driving, because people from GCHQ and SIS and our were saying, we've got to be more open, we want to be more open. Okay, are you having us on or what? And it became clear, and it's now been confirmed, and David Anderson, whose report on this I recommend, it's A Question of Trust. Again, we've got a bound version if you want to go and order one from the book publisher format, but is an excellent report on this, and he visited the agencies and just said, look, one of the things here is that young people being recruited are very informed, very literate, they access and use the internet, and while some of them might be potentially psychopathic, they are usually weeded out. So what you are left with, and Anderson made this point, is that a room in GCHQ looks like this room, and dresses the same, and has the same age profile, and has the same number of fairly intelligent people, or very intelligent people, what it is. And therefore, the common sense of civil society is an important restraint, because if they step out of order in the way that some of my more extreme colleagues might allege or fear, it's not really practical. And of course they will get people like Edward Snowden when it's felt that they've gone too far. So the sociology of intelligence officers changed, because in the Cold War you had a Manichaean mentality, and there was an existential threat. And then you come through 10 pleasant years in which we didn't feel threatened, between the collapse of the pulling down of the Berlin Wall, the reunification of Germany, and then 9/11. There were people like Bill who knew the threats were still around, and especially in Al-Qaeda. But we went away from that. Since, and this is I think one of Paul's points, since 9/11, the Western democracies have been representing themselves in a permanent state of exception. Maybe that's one of your lectures, and that is important. Another core issue, which I think fits into surveillance theory, is just testing the concept of whether surveillance matters if there is no discernible action in effect of surveillance. Until a few years ago, the British tradition really didn't recognise that there could be. Therefore, you could not be damaged by surveillance activities unless there was a chain of events, such as, for example, happened to the people who, it's the best example we've got, who were hacked by journalists. The people whose phone text messages were taken and used to abuse their privacy in the newspapers. They could prove that surveillance, surreptitious by journalists, was directly harmful to them. But the concept of surveillance by causing harm without actual effect is a fundamental intellectual idea, and it is encapsulated in the doctrine of the chilling effect, which you will find in the US legislation and judgments. You will start to find it now in, correct me if I'm wrong, in British judgments since ECHR in particular, and you will certainly find it in the judgments of the European courts, the Human Rights Court and the EU Justice Court. But these, the chilling effect is therefore something that has to be studied. Sorry, Bill.
Can I add one?
Yeah.
It was a takeoff on some of the processes that they're not doing correctly. In other words, the entire development of programs and so on are directed, or at least they say they're going to help the analysts figure out what's happening. That's the objective. But what they're doing is developing tools. And by tools, I simply mean somebody has to grab that thing by the hand, and, like you would with a screwdriver or something, turn it. Some person has to do it. Well, that's exactly what they're doing. They're just shuffling data around and organizing in different ways to show people And, but in the end, they're depending on that person to make that decision about the data they're looking at. That I call a tool. They don't need tools at all. The entire SARC was about processes. The processes we did automated the analytic decision making. That's where they have to go. But nobody's going, because they're all, I mean, first of all, most of the engineers are afraid to make the decision because it's not their field. So they push that off on the analyst, you know. I'll help the analyst get the data together and package it. You can look at it and then make his decision. But he's got to make the decision. I don't want to do that. Well, what he needs to do is get into knowledge management thinking. I've got to capture the knowledge that analysts have and use to make decisions about data. Then you need to formalize that in an electronic set of code to execute. That's a process now that makes the decision for the analyst, that presents them with those decisions to assess, not all the data they have to go through to make the decision. The process does that for it because it's captured their knowledge on how to do that. That's what they're not doing.
Could I just, Chairman, bring a little thought here? Is that one of the things I was struck when I heard, I was listening to Thomas Drake last night. Drake started his career monitoring East Germany. That was his job. So he was listening in to the Stasi's work and all of that. So he has a perspective on that. And one of the comments he makes is that the surveillance system that is now in place is like the Stasi on steroids. And that's a really interesting thought, and I don't think we really even begin to understand what the implications of having a mass surveillance society mean. I'm sort of thinking at a psychoanalytical position, and it chimes with the chilling effect on Marcel's. What impact does this have? The person that I found most interested on this so far is Joshua Cohen, who's looking in this area. But I think that's worthy of analysis. You know, if everybody knows they're under surveillance all the time, how does that impact on the way we? It's an ontological question. How do we exist?
I think we have a couple of examples, like the East Germany and the Soviet Union. They stagnated. People became a lot of drunkards. You know, they basically lost hope and incentive to be creative and innovative, and that's the kind of thing that.
Look at the phone hacking here. Yeah. If you talk to the celebrities who have their phones hacked distrusted everybody around them. They thought everybody was informing on them and making money out of them, and it caused them a great deal of. So there was some really quite interesting psychological dimensions.
And I always refer back to Wolfgang Schmidt's comment. Wolfgang Schmidt was an ex-lieutenant colonel in the East German Stasi. When he was looking at NSA's program, NSA GCHQ together, he said, for us, this would have been a dream come true.
Yeah. But one of the things that you touch on there is what is the regime for actually doing something with the surveillance? Because in the total surveillance societies, and question mark, are we heading into one? Are we in one already? The thing that made people's lives miserable was that they could be intruded on again and again. So if I were to take the side of some of the spooks and advocates I talked to, they said, well, we collect the stuff, but we never read it unless there's an exceptional reason to cause us to go there. That's the big argument on bulk, put by people like David Omand. But one second, let me do my part first.
Go ahead.
What has also come out of the Snowden papers is that there is a specific doctrine of effects, which means actually doing something, perhaps even automatically doing something, because you read something into your cyber material. One of the early papers published by Snowden, which again, like most of them, has got little attention, was a GCHQ outfit with the curious name of J-Trig, which stood for something meaningly, because it was eventually about causing harm, doing stuff. And I don't think any of us, including trying to advocate to Parliament, had enough data to actually sense what regulatory regime should be kicked in place to do with that. And our concern has been echoed, I think, by the Intelligence and Security Committee, which was rather dumb when it started out in response to, frankly, my early stories was what led to these things being created. It's now become remarkably good compared to what it was, and its new chairman, who's an ex-Conservative Attorney General, seems a remarkably principled and diligent person. But they are not really looking at that, and they had an argument with the government recently. It's in the final report on the bill, which is quite a slim one that they got out about 2 weeks ago. And they've criticised the government in discrete terms for not fessing up to what the agencies are doing in terms of using that data. And they haven't, other people have said they're not having an honest discussion about the way that the agencies actually work, which is out with the law to repress and suppress and to achieve their objectives. And all of this drives back again to ontological questions about trust and so on, which is why David Anderson's decision to call his report a question of trust is important.
I was good.
What's terribly important about that? Sorry, I'm just getting excited here. Is that the when we're talking about collection of data, we're talking about a passive act. But when you look at what JTRI did, that's a proactive interventionist approach, which has all sorts of other dimensions attached to it.
And there's more to it than that. FBI and CIA have direct access into these databases, and there's no oversight of them at all. It's all done under Executive Order 12333. And
Presidential order.
Yeah, and they also share it worldwide through the MLAT process, the Mutual Law Enforcement Act treaty, that where they share information with other law enforcement agencies around the world. They're cooperating with both the DEA and the FBI. That information is shared through that process, but they never give them the original data, right? They have to go through a parallel construction, which is all by design. By the Department of Justice as to how to proceed with the use of NSA data to convict people and put them in jail. That's all been laid out by Reuters, and
this is because historically intelligence agencies have been firewalled from the policing functions. In fact, that's really become rather mythological, but it's not really been admitted to, and it has problems again for jurisprudence. Because intelligence agencies properly work to different standards. They have to work within impartial and incomplete evidence and reach inference or judgments or recommendations, which are not as robust by their nature as, say, something coming out of a court, deliberative process. The problem is that when you start taking executive action on that lower quality of information, which is the result of intelligence. Now, if you're somebody in the military fighting in the field, that's what you've bloody got to do. If you're however, you're in the measured citizen of civil society, it is utterly different. And the processes set out by constitution and law are at risk of being subverted by the incursion, secretly, of intelligence information into legal decision taking.
Yeah, and that's where this policy set up by the Department of Justice comes into play, where they have to do this parallel construction and use the data they parallel construct in court of law and substitute for the data from NSA. That to me is what I call a planned program perjury policy run by the Department of Justice. I couldn't think of another P.
I think I need to assert the chairman role here. At this point, I'd like to say thank you again. And thank you.